Now we're going to move on to apparently everyone in here's favorite.
So when they got to the 52nd episode, they said, all right, it's time to switch gears and we're going to start adapting Armored Fleet Die Rugger 15. If you were a kid in the 80s, 1985, like I was, you probably remember this day because it was frustrating. It had no fanfare, it had no warning. It's just 1 minute you were watching the Lions, and then the next afternoon you sat down and you were like, who is this thing? What is this? Every shot in Lion Force Voltron of Galaxy Garrison, including in the intro, they formed an alliance. That's all from Die Rugger. They pulled all those shots from Die Rugger. So every time you have the Lion Force calling Galaxy Garrison and calling Earth, they're talking to footage from Die Rugger.
Which was handy because they had all this extra time to fill, like what with cutting out all that beheading stuff. They just stuck in some Galaxy Garrison stuff.
And this was very convenient because Toei Animation had done all of these shows around the same era, so they all kind of stylistically, as far as the artwork, they look the same. So you could kind of blend them together, but it was all pulled from Die Rugger. The show is centered around an exploration fleet. It's very different from Lion Force, where it's 5 space explorers stranded. It is an exploration fleet, much like Star Trek, that is looking for planets to settle on. They need breathing room. And
that's only in the Voltron, though.
Right, in the Voltron. In Die Rugger, it's a little different. There's a nuance. In Die Rugger, they're actually just cartographers mapping the galaxy.
So they actually are more like Star Trek in the Japanese version. They're just out there exploring and sort of taking samples and writing down the map of where everything is, whereas in the American version, they are looking to colonize other worlds because they have run out of room, overpopulated, whatever, and they need space to live. Which is kind of weird because, like, to me anyway, it feels like you would be less on their side as colonists to, like, just come onto a planet and start using up resources there when you clearly aren't really good at managing that kind of stuff because you've gotten out of control on your own planet. Whereas in the Japanese version, it's like, okay, well, they're just interested in science and they want to know what's out there. Like, it's just very different vibe.
Yeah, and in the middle of doing all this either cartography or planet surveying, they run into their enemy, known as the Drools. That's not the way it's spelled. It's Drules. Drools. These guys. This is Hazar. He's sort
Which
of.
luckily he looks a lot like Lotor.
Lotor.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Senklein.
Yeah. In the original Dibazal. In the
I
original.
got you doing it.
Boy, stop that. In the original Die Rugger, these guys are called the Galvestons, which always made me follow that with Texas. So that was a
New
little
Texas. Brave Star. 6 degrees of separation.
Stop being meta. All right.
Sorry. But yeah, they had destroyed their homeworld, apparently worse than Earth had. And so this was, they were in a very dire situation. So you kind of feel bad for them in a way. Although it's like, you feel bad for the people on the planet. The people in the government were complete jerks. I wonder what that's like. But anyway, they were like, just kind of in this really crappy situation. These poor people are trapped on this world that's like this, and their leadership is more worried about, their ego than they are about finding them somewhere else to live. So.
Yeah, and the thing is that Voltron becomes sort of a backdrop to this. He's almost like collateral damage. It's like not only are the Drools, the Galvestons, refusing to prioritize, getting their people off this dying world, now their egos are wrapped into beating down Voltron and the people that keep him running because they've walked into their backyard and they've decided they have to win this fight rather than save their own people. But it is a structurally very different show from Lion Force, and that is part of the reason why children largely rejected it when it came out. It did not have the mythology that Voltron Lion Force had. Voltron Lion Force was much more magical, and this was much more scientific.
It's just very. We watched the Japanese version too, and it's not. I actually don't mind Vehicle Voltron or Die Rugger, but it's just a very different type of show. Like, when we were watching Die Rugger, it was about halfway through before I started looking forward to watching the next episode and not feeling like, oh God, do we have to not watch another episode of this thing? But it gets better as you watch it. So if you ever have that opportunity, the stories seem to get a little better towards the end.
The funny thing about Die Rugger is that it's not just 5 lions that combine into one bot. It's 15 vehicles. And they combine not only into their subgroups, land, sea, and air, but then they also can reconfigure and combine into vehicle Voltron. And so in that way, it's sort of like a triple change. It's a combiner.
You have a really good analogy. It's like this, if we're going with the mythology that Voltron is this ancient force, right, that was created somewhere else out in the galaxy, it seems a little weird that his feet are Jeep Wagoneers.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I just, like, it's hard to buy, like, it's a much more believable plot that someone on Earth created this. And then it's never really, you don't understand why they can't create any more. Because, like, their team is out there and it's like they're being slaughtered by these guys, the Drool, but, like, they're not sending any help. It's just, it's very weird.
Yeah, right. And they talk about how this is not supposed to be a weapon. This is supposed to be a self-defense, last resort thing. And yet it becomes the ultimate weapon by the end of the show. It's like our starships and battleships can't do jack. So send out our, defense-only weapon, which is also the ultimate ancient secret that we've bestowed on these 15 people, which is comprised of Jeep Wagoneers and pre-Soviet, nuclear subs.
And in the first few episodes of Vehicle Voltron, they talk about how Voltron has a time limit. Does anybody else remember this?
Yeah.
It's like 5 minutes is as long as he can go before he runs out of juice or whatever. And they very quickly do away with that. It's like they didn't think it through very well because they're like, okay, by the end of this show, he's having these very long battle sequences. I don't see how you're going to edit that to make it seem like...
Yeah. He's got 5 minutes of solar energy. And then Peter Cullen says, there's not much time left. And you're going, as a kid, you're like, that stinks. I don't want a big robot that's only got 5 minutes of energy. I don't like those kind of limits. And Lion Force didn't have that built into it. So,
and the original Japanese also did not have that. It's just a completely weird thing that was thrown into the American version, and then they just pretended like they never said that.
Right.
Forget that part. There's a lot of politics in the show. So a lot of the fans of Vehicle Voltron say that that's what's so great about it, is that it's more cerebral. It's, it's kind of like, original Trek versus Next Gen kind of thing. Like, if you're into Star Trek at all, it's very like, oh, we're going to be very thoughtful about how we're going to solve this, and we're going to sit around and debate it, and there's politics, and a lot of kids in the 80s were like, this is super boring. Like, it's like Star Wars versus Star Trek, really. I mean, it's like if you like fantasy and like lightsaber battles, then you like original Voltron. If you like, thinking about, theories of morality and, space exploration, then you like Star Trek, and you might like Vehicle Voltron.
Or Kirk versus Picard. If you want to put it in the same universe, it's the Voltron universe, the Star Trek universe. Lion Force Voltron is more original trilogy, colorful Shatner, and Die Rugger is more dystopian. It's more thought-provoking, but it's also a slower burn. How many people in this room can name all 6 of the pilots that are sitting up there? What? Really? Maybe? Okay, so there's some uncertainty. I'm feeling the audience pull away from me.
We're not going to ask you.
We're not going to ask you. We're just curious. You've got...
Linda knows that I can't name.
That's true.
Okay, well, let's look at it purely by numbers.
Probably come close, though.
Let's look at it purely by numbers. You got 5. If you count Sven, 6, but, God rest him. So you've got...
Who can name them in the original Japanese?
You've got Keith, Lance, Hunk, Pidge, Allura, and Sven. All right. Name them.
If anybody can name them, we'll give you something.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Seriously, this.
I honestly wouldn't know if you were right if you did try to name them all. So I know the main ones.
This is not a crew. This is a high school reunion. And there's just too many characters to the point that only the leaders of the team were actually focused on throughout the 52 episodes. You get some episodes where they would have one character who would be sick for the episode because of an alien spore, and then like in another episode, there would be someone who was having like an emotional crisis. But it was always that it's like you say to yourself, this is their one episode, and then they're going to disappear into the background again.
It's
we'll
like
never see them.
Star Trek, I'm telling you.
And the other funny thing is, in Voltron, there were a number of episodes, even after the princess took over the Blue Lion, where they tried to test out new pilots. One time it was that guy with the long flowing blue hair who turned out to be a bad guy. Another time it was Koran's son, or who he thought was his son. So they were always attempting to find replacement pilots in case something went wrong. There's more than a few episodes of this show where somebody gets laid up from an illness or from a wound, and they can't form Voltron. There's nobody on this massive ship that can take over.
Even though they can pilot the ship that this thing that Voltron is being transported on, and they can run the ship, no one else can apparently learn how to pilot it, and that's a big problem. Like even in the Japanese show, you're like, what is your contingency plan? Like, you're in space, you're fighting these people who just want to kill you for no reason at all, really. Like, I'd be coming up with some plans, but
Best way to take out vehicle Voltron. Stop one guy.
Stop one guy.
that's all you got to do, really. Yeah.
Right. Give one guy a cold.
I always wondered, watching the Japanese version, did they ever give a reason why the colors of the uniforms didn't match up to the colors of the lines?
He's asking why the colors of the uniforms of the pilots in Lion Force never matched up with the colors of the actual lions.
No,
Some of them did.
They don't give a reason, but there is a really funny line in the Japanese where Koran gives them all the uniforms for the first time, and they were like, "Wow, this is kind of weird that you already had these uniforms here." Like,
Yeah, I think
What the hell?
it's Sven who says something like, "You guys seem really overly prepared for all of this." It's pretty funny.
it was really funny when we were watching. I was like, "Wow, that's really great."
It has blood on it.
Because of the lukewarm reception given to Vehicle Voltron, unfortunately, Voltron 2, known as Gladiator Force, which you saw in the toys that we showed you, never got adapted. Lightspeed Electroid Albegus was never turned into the third and final Voltron show. They decided to contact Toei Animation and instead start animating new Lion Force episodes from scratch. But first, let's just talk a little bit about Lightspeed Electroid Albegus. We wanted to show you the intro of this show for anyone who always wondered what happened to Gladiator Force Voltron. It was a show in Japan. It just never got ported over. If you want to dance, go ahead.
All right, you get the picture.
Yeah,
It's disco robots in space.
and I don't think, given Vehicle Voltron not being successful, that this would have done much better actually, because you had 15 robots combining into one large robot, which from a toy perspective seems pretty awesome. It's like Devastator from Transformers. It's like this is getting serious, and that didn't. But the show couldn't carry it. This is 3 human robots that turn into
Humanoid.
one human robot. That's
Yeah.
not interesting. So they decided instead that they were going to have Toei Animation make new Voltron episodes, and they introduced 2 new characters into the mix. You'll see them on the left and right, Cossack and Merla. They were new villains for the final season of Lion Force Voltron, or the final season of Voltron period. But it was challenging for Toei Animation to wrap their heads around it when they got the request, because they had already done Beast King Go Lion, and they knew for a fact that all of these characters were dead.
Spoiler alert, sorry. If you were gonna watch the Japanese, like, all these characters die, and they're not just going to the hospital planet.
Yeah, so they were like, wait a second, you want us to make new episodes with Shirogane, Sven? All right, sure, we'll animate whatever you want. And they were making essentially new Go Lion episodes in an alternate reality. Who had the toys growing up? Oh, see, okay, that's better. That's what I wanted
Nice.
to see.
Okay,
Okay,
who had the original metal toy?
the Matchbox. Okay, you all were lucky and rich, and I hate you.
Who just had the Panache Place?
What's up?
I have a die rotor still in its box in the backseat of my car right now.
Is your car in a parking garage?
Where is your car?
Is your car in a parking garage? Wait a minute. Is it covered from the sun? Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that you were protecting that vintage toy from sun bleaching. Yes. The original toys were made by Popey. Popey was a Japanese toy company that was eventually bought by Bandai. And they made the original Beast King Go Lion as part of their Chogokin line, Chogokin meaning super alloy. This was what the basis for the Matchbox toy was. And then, of course, the Die Rugger on the right was not part of their DX line because he was all plastic, but that's because he was 15 pieces that had to go together.
And he's really tall.
He's 15 inches high, whereas Voltron is about 12. So, and so they called them Voltron 3 and Voltron 1, as we told you before. But there were some problems getting them over to the United States because of safety regulations. A child had died in the 70s because of a Battlestar Galactica toy. That's why rocket-firing Boba Fett never had a rocket that fired. He was glued into his back. And then Voltron was stripped of all of his weapons before he hit the States. So on the left is the Matchbox, or the Popey version with all the missiles and the launchers, the sword, the shield. On the right is what you got from Matchbox Toys. They even went so far as to dull the teeth on the lions before they brought them here.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. You can tell, like, you can look at them
Yeah.
and see they're very rounded as opposed to pointy.
right.
And they weren't even that pointy. Like, they weren't sharp or anything.
The missile launchers really are. We have this one on the left at home. The missile launchers really are potent.
Yeah,
when
they
you
are.
when you
They're so
they're-
awesome.
Yeah, when you when you lock and
are.
load, those springs that the Japanese used in their launchers, even though it's only this big, it's like pulling back a crossbow. It's just like
And it goes, like, across the room. The cat doesn't know what hit it.
right,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Fly 20 yards
right,
in that sucker.
yes. And so eventually they realized their mistake. Matchbox did, and so they gave us a blazing sword and shield on a blister card that you could get. The thing is that Matchbox didn't anticipate the fact that every episode ends with him forming the blazing sword. Just get rid of it, it'll be fine. And the kid said, nope.
You were out of luck if you liked Vehicle Voltron, though, because they didn't make this for Vehicle Voltron, so
Right.
he never had his accurate sword. I guess you could give him this sword, but it's
Right.
not really the same.
And so then, because of the Vehicle Voltron and Voltron Lion Force coming together and them not adapting Albegus, Matchbox changed their packaging to no longer have the Roman numerals later on in the run. Now, at this point, when you see this packaging, you're doing a dice roll because by this point, demand for Voltrons had become so huge that Japan outsourced the toy to Taiwan. And when they outsourced it to Taiwanese factories, we had a problem, and it made the news. Lead. Lead got into the paint, lead got into the toys, and they were recalled in the United States. So if you have one that says something like Bandai Go Lion D on the silver sticker, it means you probably have one full of lead. And if you
So
have,
don't put it in your mouth.
yeah, and if you've had any memory problems growing up, you might know. Now, as an answer to this, Panache Place in 1985 came out with they licensed Voltron, and they came out with a plastic version. It came with action figure, Star Wars figure size pilots that you could put in the Lions. But as you can see, Panache Place Voltron is kind of, well, he's kind of goofy. He's
He's kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
yeah.
Like, he's huge.
He's the one I grew up with, and I love this toy a lot. But it is a little chunky. It's not very accurate, but it does have a lot of play value. And they gave you the castle and all the villains that went with it. The one problem was they didn't give us a row beast of any importance. They gave us this row beast. And I'm thinking,
Use your imagination.
yeah, I'm like, that's not going to work. Why would you do that? So they decided,
It does look like one you'd put in water and it would grow.
yeah. So
I don't think that works, though.
So I grew up doing this with my Voltron. I just used the Rancor monster, and it was fine. I wish there had been a row beast. They they just never got around to it because Panache was almost ready to do a Robeast. It was going to be kind of cool. It was going to be a coffin, a flying coffin, like from the show, but it transformed into a huge Robeast that was the scale of Voltron, and it would have been great. But Panache Place went bankrupt. So then LJN took over the license. Yeah, I know, they made the worst video games of the 80s. We're all scarred.
Everyone loves LJN.
They had an interesting take on Voltron. They visualized these lions as wind-up toys with wheels. So you could pull it back and zing, roll it along the ground, and then form Voltron, who had all these wheels hanging off of him. He looked like Optimus Prime.
Which would have been awesome for vehicle Voltron, but for cats, it's just kind of bizarre. Like cats on roller skates, I guess.
Yeah. In the 90s...
I hear groans.
Yeah. In the late 90s, with the surge in animation, digital animation from Pixar and Toy Story, some very bleeding edge TV animators were trying to get that technology onto the small screen. They tried it with Transformers Beast Wars. They tried it with Reboot. So they attempted to do this with Voltron. It was ambitious. The lions and the combined robot looked pretty good for the time, but this is where the animation shows its seams, even back then.
Who remembers the show? Wow.
Wow.
Hands shooting up. All
Yeah.
right, well then you'll enjoy this clip.
That's going a bit far right there. Finish him.
You're crazy. Can't you see this is more important than you and me? The entire universe is in danger.
So
They did the best they could.
I don't want to hear anybody who's in this room from now on ever say that the original Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight was geriatric. I don't want to hear you say that ever again. Ever. Because you've now seen this. Okay? So they tried it again with Voltron Force on Nicktoons in 2011 or 2012.
It was 2011.
2011. And this show was actually the highest rated premiere on Nicktoons ever when it debuted. Right. And we weren't in college and had 3 channels to our name in a lounge, and everybody wanted to watch, Friends. So Voltron Force sort of picks up from where the original Lion Force left off. It has the characters now trying to pick up the pieces from the original battle with Zarkon. Lotor's the only one left alive on the bad guy side. He's experimenting with a chemical called, or an element called Hagarium. And the Lion Force team has decided to bring on some new recruits. This show was a little controversial when it aired because it didn't have the original music. It had an intro by Swizz Beatz, which was pretty cool on its own, but when it's applied to Voltron, it's a little weird because you have this thing
It has
starting.
a totally different tone.
Right.
I mean, it sets a different tone for the show. So, talking to Jeremy Corey, who sort of helped write some of the episodes and things like that, he used to have the social media manager job. He says, kids love it. If you see a kid watching this show, they love the song, and that's probably true. I don't know, but it's just weird when you have this idea in your mind of Voltron or, even Go Lion, and then you watch that, it's just like, what am I watching? It's just very odd.
And about halfway through the series, when Voltron starts to do the combining sequences, they reintroduce the original music because they realized, people want to hear that music. Dun, dun, da, da, dun, da, da. So they brought it back.
It also turned the word Voltron into a verb.
Right.
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 Let's Voltron.
Let's Voltron.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Good point.
And there was another little gimmick that happened with Voltron Force.
The Lion King.
Yeah. Any lion.
love that.
Oh, do
Yeah.
you?
I do because
It's kind of cool. It's a
as
cool.
it switched out, you're like adding additional features, and it was kind of a way for Voltron to expand, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Every
It's a
lion could be
cool
the
growth
center.
opportunity.
Yeah. They almost had toys for this, and then it didn't materialize. Yeah. I've seen the prototypes in Web's offices, and they were
were
just
actually really cool.
Yeah, they looked great. They were just still like sculpture mock-ups, so they didn't have any of the features yet. But it was going to be really, really neat.
This show also had these new characters. They had all the original characters plus these 3 kids. I guess is that
Yeah.
that idea that Hollywood always seems to have, that in order for kids to like something, there have to be kids in the show.
Right.
Which when we were kids, that was not really true. I mean, there were a few films and things like that, like The Goonies, that had kids as the stars, or The Neverending Story. But there were, like Indiana Jones, aside from the
Ghostbusters.
second one, doesn't have kids. Ghostbusters,
Yeah,
things like
Star
that.
Wars, the original, didn't have kids. We all know how that went down.
Because you wanted to pretend, you wanted to pretend to be like Indiana Jones. You didn't want to be like the little kid who's hanging out with Indiana Jones.
Right.
Like when you go outside and play pretend. So, but these guys they're actually kind of interesting characters and cool characters. I don't really know exactly why the show didn't continue, like in terms of ratings.
I think some of it had to do with budget. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly mention, one of the funniest ththings I loved about the beginning of this series was how they really made a point about getting rid of Keith's mullet.
Yeah.
That was sad.
It was not sad, it
I
was
loved his mullet.
awesome.
It was so 80s. And awesome. They could have had it go the other way. They could have had it look like that guy with like long hair. Like that would have been awesome, right?
Shaved it all off.
That's true. Yes.
I thought one of the things I liked about it was they acknowledged the fact that the original team would have had developed a celebrity status, because I remember these kids were or at least one of them was really had a real obsession with had a real obsession with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And one of the kids starts to realize he's got an energy connection to the Lions. He has a larger role to play. They were nuanced characters. They were three-dimensional, and it was nice. It was nice to see that. And now the latest news is that DreamWorks has licensed Voltron. They didn't buy it; they've licensed it. World Events Production still owns Voltron. They call themselves the small mom and pop robot shop. But DreamWorks has licensed it for developing a new show.
They license like pretty much everything 80s wise, like
Right, because classic.
Yogi Bear too.
Because they bought Classic Media. There isn't really a lot of news on that front right now, but I'm interested to see what happens over the next year or two, because I'm sure there's something in development. I'm just not privy to it.
We're not going to see an actual Voltron movie, are we?
That is part of the plan at some point, is that they have been working on screenplays to develop a live-action Voltron film. It takes movies a long time, and when it comes to these licensed properties, and the amount of times they trade hands and then licensing agreements change as they're trying to get all their ducks in a row, it can take a long time. So unless you have Michael Bay and Steven Spielberg behind you, and do you want that, then you're not going to see something get greenlit very quickly. You need a power player to do that.
And then it's super complicated too, because there's been rumors of a Power Rangers film coming out and things like that, which would definitely be problematic unless they just went with the whole thing and like, let's just go head to head and compete in the marketplace. But they're very similar. You see these young and kids today, and they think that Power Rangers, they have no idea who Voltron is. Like, a lot of people just hear Power Rangers and they're like, yeah, that's the one, that's the show. And it's like, originally they were both created, I think, around the same time in Japan, but Voltron was here first.
Yeah, Voltron
in the
landed here
States.
first. Thank you for coming to our panel today. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed it. We are going to be, before you guys go, we are going to be on Monday at 11:30 a.m. in this room. We're going to be doing One Season Wonders 80s cartoons, so please come back.